Welcome back. We all know BTS as the untouchable kings of pop, but behind the flashing lights, there is a secret dynamic only Bang Si-hyuk truly understands. Have you ever wondered what really happens when the cameras stop rolling? Who among these global icons texts him at 3 a.m. just to say they miss him, or casually crashes his office like it is their own room? Get ready, because we are pulling back the curtain on the hilarious and deeply emotional bonds that built an empire. Who is the ultimate clingy king? Number 7. RM, the Midnight Philosopher, exposed. Imagine carrying the weight of the entire world on your shoulders, being the undisputed spokesperson for a generation, and standing tall at the podium of the United Nations, yet still feeling the desperate, undeniable need to text your boss at 3 in the morning just to ask if a single word in your latest lyric makes sense. That is the raw, unfiltered reality for Kim Namjoon, universally known as RM, the legendary leader of BTS, who surprisingly kicks off our list as the 7th most clingy member, according to Bang Si-hyuk himself. While millions of fans around the globe might picture RM as this stoic, unshakable pillar of strength who navigates high-pressure international interviews with effortless charisma and flawless English, the truth behind the closed soundproof doors of the Hybe studios paints a radically different, far more vulnerable picture. Bang PD has often revealed in behind-the-scenes moments and candid interviews that Namjoon's specific brand of clinginess isn't about needing physical hugs, constant superficial praise, or throwing childish tantrums, but rather it stems from an incredibly deep, almost exhausting sense of intellectual and emotional dependency that has been quietly building for well over a decade. Since the very beginning, even before BTS was officially a cohesive concept back in 2010, RM was the foundational seed, the extraordinarily talented underground rapper known as Runch Randa, who literally convinced Bang Si-hyuk to build an entire hip-hop idol empire around his raw, untapped potential. Because of this unique, deeply personal origin story, their interpersonal dynamic is entirely different compared to the rest of the group. RM views Bang PD not merely as a corporate CEO or a strict boss, but as a lifelong philosophical mentor, a safe musical sounding board, and arguably the only other person on the planet who truly understands the crushing, suffocating pressure of steering the massive, unstoppable cultural juggernaut that BTS has become. Do you really think writing legendary chart-topping masterpieces like Spring Day or conceptually complex record-breaking albums like Map of the Soul happens in total peaceful isolation? Absolutely not. Bang Si-hyuk has openly admitted that when RM falls deep into his creative zone, he becomes a relentlessly clingy communicator. We are talking about literal essays of text messages sent in the dead of night, breaking down the complex psychological themes of Carl Jung, questioning the existential purpose and cultural impact of their upcoming comeback, or simply expressing his overwhelming, very human anxiety about whether he is truly being a good enough leader and a strong enough shield for the other 6 members. It is a well-known, endearing fact among the senior Hybe staff that RM will casually wander into Bang PD's private office completely uninvited, just to dramatically collapse on the leather couch and stare blankly at the ceiling while bouncing abstract poetic ideas off him for hours on end, utterly refusing to leave the room until he finds mental clarity. This isn't just a standard professional collaboration, it is a profound emotional reliance that anchors him to reality when the world spins too fast. The infamous god of destruction might accidentally break expensive sunglasses, stage props, and cutting-edge studio equipment with a single clumsy touch, but he is fiercely, almost desperately protective of his fragile, deeply emotional relationship with the man who first believed in him when he was just an awkward kid with a massive dream. Think deeply about the isolating reality that comes with unimaginable global fame. Who can RM realistically talk to when the burden of superstardom becomes far too heavy to carry alone? He cannot always dump his deepest leadership insecurities onto his younger members, because he genuinely believes his primary job is to protect them at all costs, so he naturally, instinctively clings to Bang Si-hyuk. He constantly seeks out those quiet, private late-night drinking sessions, engaging in intense, impassioned, hours-long debates about art, modern life, the fleeting nature of fame, and the terrifying future of the music industry, basically refusing to let Bang PD sleep or go home to his own
family until his own hyperactive, restless mind is finally at peace. This intense level of intellectual attachment proves that beneath the confident, sharply dressed, commanding leader who single-handedly controls stadiums of 80,000 screaming fans, there is still that same anxious, brilliant teenage boy from Ilsan who just desperately wants to make sure he's making his ultimate mentor proud. Is it not incredibly moving and somewhat heartbreaking to realize that the very man who guides the biggest band in human history still so desperately needs a guiding, steady hand himself? Does it not completely change the way you listen to his deeply personal solo projects like Indigo or his introspective mixtape Mono, knowing the sheer, staggering volume of midnight panic attacks and relentless reassurance from Si-hyuk that went into perfecting every single emotionally charged syllable? RM's brand of clinginess is heavy, profoundly intellectual, and deeply rooted in unwavering loyalty, making him the absolute perfect, fascinating starting point for our dramatic countdown. But if you think his late-night philosophical text essays are intense, just wait until you hear the chaotic, boundary-destroying behavior of the next member on our list, who literally refuses to let the CEO have a single moment of peace.
Number 6. Suga, the grumpy cat's secret affection revealed. If you look up the precise definition of the word tsundere in the dictionary, you will undoubtedly find a glaring high-definition picture of Min Yoongi, universally known and feared by underground rappers everywhere as August D, and loved by millions across the globe as BTS's Suga. On the surface, he is the ultimate, untouchable ice prince of the modern music industry, a fiercely independent, highly introverted producer who spits venomous, tongue-twisting rhymes and casually brushes off his harshest critics with a chilling, nonchalant glare. Yet, prepare to have your entire perception completely shattered into a million pieces, because sitting surprisingly at number 6 on Si-hyuk's highly classified clingy list is none other than this seemingly cold-hearted, detached musical genius. How in the world can the man who famously prefers sleeping in a dark, quiet room over any form of human interaction possibly be considered clingy by his billionaire boss? The fascinating answer lies in the deep, shared trauma and profound emotional scars of their absolute rock-bottom beginnings. You have to actively remember the legendary, almost humorous lore that built their relationship. Yoongi was literally tricked by Bang PD into joining BTS, lured into the agency with the false, empty promise that he would just be a hidden background producer in a pure hip-hop crew, never having to learn choreography or participate in exhausting idol promotions. That monumental, life-altering deception could have easily created a foundation of lifelong resentment, but instead, it miraculously forged an unbreakable, intensely codependent bond between two obsessive workaholics who basically lived together in a suffocatingly small, damp underground studio, eating cheap convenience store takeout while desperately trying to keep a rapidly failing, debt-ridden agency afloat. Yoongi's specific, highly unique version of clinginess is not about asking for warm hugs, sweet verbal affirmations, or public displays of affection. Rather, it manifests as a relentless, aggressively demanding need for ultimate musical validation from the absolute only man whose critical musical ear he truly, completely respects. According to highly placed HYB insiders and legendary company whispers, Yoongi will routinely compose a brutally raw, emotionally devastating track at 4 in the morning and immediately blast the massive audio file directly into Bang PD's personal inbox, fully expecting a detailed, multi-paragraph, highly technical critique before the sun even has a chance to come up over Seoul. If Si-hyuk does not reply within an acceptable, immediate time frame, the supposedly aloof and unbothered Min Yoongi does not just shrug it off and go to sleep. Instead, he will literally march directly to the CEO's executive office, aggressively push the heavy door open without bothering to knock, sit himself down on the most expensive leather sofa with a heavily dissatisfied, adorable pout, and fiercely demand to know why his latest magnum opus is being blatantly ignored. This is the exact same man who vehemently claims on international television that he hates being around people,
yet he constantly actively seeks out entirely private, heavily guarded late-night drinking sessions with Bang PD, pouring outrageously expensive whiskey and pouring out his deepest, darkest industry frustrations until the early hours of the morning. Bang Si-hyuk has emotionally confessed in the past that Yoongi is incredibly, stubbornly attached to their shared history, frequently bringing up their miserable, starving, struggling days just to explicitly remind them both of exactly how far they have clawed their way to the absolute top of the global charts together. When Yoongi faced the agonizing, terrifying reality of his severe, chronic shoulder injury and the dark, suffocating depths of his mental health struggles, which he so bravely and transparently laid bare for the world in his solo mixtapes, Bang PD was the silent, immovable, invisible rock he secretly leaned his entire weight on, functioning as the ultimate father figure who firmly and lovingly told him to prioritize his actual human survival over his glittering idol persona. Yoongi will never, ever publicly admit it to the screaming crowds, but he actively, deliberately seeks out Bang PD's physical presence whenever he is feeling critically creatively blocked or deeply emotionally drained. Simply walking in and silently sitting in the quietest corner of Bang's office for hours on end, not saying a single solitary word, just intensely working on his laptop while peacefully absorbing the comforting, familiar, grounding presence of his oldest and most trusted mentor. It is a remarkably quiet, incredibly stubborn, and profoundly loyal kind of clinginess that perfectly defines his true character. He is exactly like a fiercely independent, scarred alley cat who furiously hisses at approaching strangers, but will stubbornly, deliberately choose to sleep on the exact center of his chosen owner's keyboard just to absolutely ensure he remains the indisputable center of attention. Have you ever actually stopped to notice how Yoongi's toughest, most aggressive, hard-hitting August D tracks always, without fail, somehow trace their thematic roots back to the sacred promises he made to his agency, his brothers, and his fans? That is because his entire massive creative drive is permanently, deeply anchored to the singular man who originally gave a poor, starving, desperate underground beatmaker from Daegu a legitimate, world-changing chance to conquer the entire globe. So the next time you see Suga looking entirely unbothered, effortlessly cool, and utterly detached while walking down a glamorous, flashing international red carpet, just take a moment to remember that hidden directly behind that intimidating, untouchable facade is a fiercely loyal, intensely clinging artist who will absolutely throw a silent, grumpy, terrifying tantrum if his favorite producer does not immediately praise his latest piano melody. It is a stunning, heartwarming, and beautifully complex contradiction that makes you love and respect him even more deeply. But if you think Suga's grumpy, demanding, high-maintenance musical clinginess is wildly entertaining, you will simply not believe the sheer, unfiltered, completely chaotic emotional attachment of the very next member on our list, who practically treats the entire HYBE HYB executive floor like his own personal, unregulated playground.
Number 5. J-Hope, the sunshine's desperate need for shadows, unveiled. When the entire world looks at Si-hyuk, universally adored as J-Hope, they immediately see an unbreakable, blinding ray of pure sunshine, the ultimate mood maker, and the flawless, terrifyingly strict dance captain who can execute the most complex choreography with a massive, effortless smile on his face. But behind the heavily tinted windows of the HYBE executive offices, a completely different, shockingly vulnerable reality unfolds. You might naturally assume that the guy whose literal stage name is entirely based on being the absolute beacon of hope for his members and millions of fans worldwide would be the most emotionally independent, self-sustaining person in the group. But Bang PD has consistently hinted that the exact opposite is actually true, placing our beloved Hobie firmly at number 5 on this incredibly exclusive list of clinginess. The harsh, unspoken truth about being the designated happy pill of the biggest boy band in human history is that the immense, crushing pressure to constantly smile, to never show a single ounce of fatigue, and to seamlessly bridge the intense gap between the rap line and the vocal line takes a monumental, devastating psychological toll that very few people can truly comprehend.
When the flashing stadium lights finally power down, the deafening cheers fade into complete silence, and his boundless, infectious energy inevitably runs completely dry, Si-hyuk completely drops his glowing idol persona and transforms into a severely anxious, relentless perfectionist who desperately needs an emotional anchor to keep from drowning in his own impossibly high standards. Bang PD is that exact anchor. According to company legends, J-Hope's specific brand of clinginess is entirely based on a desperate burning need for ultimate, unfiltered validation from the one man who orchestrated his entire career trajectory, from a talented underground street dancer in Gwangju to a global musical titan. While he acts like the untouchable, strict pillar of strength for the younger members, constantly checking their angles and monitoring their mental health, Si-hyuk completely reverts to a worried, approval-seeking child when he is around Bang PD. He is infamous for relentlessly seeking out the CEO after every single major performance, not to celebrate the victory, but to intensely, almost obsessively break down every single micro mistake he thinks he made on stage, desperately begging Bang PD to honestly tell him if he actually ruined the show. During the unimaginably stressful, terrifying period when he was preparing to headline Lollapalooza all by himself, bearing the historically unprecedented weight of being the very first South Korean artist to headline a major American music festival, his level of clinginess reportedly skyrocketed to absolute unprecedented extremes. He wasn't just texting Bang PD, he was practically living in his shadow, sending endless streams of midnight vocal memos, frantic choreography drafts, and deeply insecure messages expressing his raw, aggressive, and incredibly dark undertones of his solo work. You're literally hearing the exact private conversations he has been having with Bang PD behind closed doors for years, shedding his bright, sunny skin and demanding to be seen for the complex, shadowy, entirely human artist he actually is. His clinginess is not about weakness, it is about survival, about finding that one perfectly safe, entirely judgment-free space where he can finally stop smiling, drop the heavy mask, and just breathe normally without the whole world watching his every single move. So the next time you see J-Hope effortlessly lighting up a stage with his signature dazzling smile, remember the profound, quiet, emotional dependency he shares with the man who continually gives him permission to embrace his shadows. But if you think Si-hyuk's desperate need for validation is intense, you will absolutely not be prepared for the hilariously demanding, fiercely territorial behavior of the superstar occupying our number 4 spot, who literally treats Bang PD's wallet and time like his own personal property.
Number 4. Jin, the shameless wallet inspector, uncensored. When you think of the traditional, highly intimidating power dynamics between a billionaire corporate CEO and his contracted employees in the fiercely competitive South Korean entertainment industry, you usually picture deep bows, strict formalities, and a terrifying level of unbreakable professional distance. But literally all of those corporate rules are violently thrown out the window the second Kim Sok-jin walks into the room. Sitting comfortably and completely unashamed at number 4 on our list of the most fiercely clingy BTS members is the undisputed, self-proclaimed worldwide handsome, a man whose specific, entirely unique brand of clinginess revolves entirely around treating one of the richest, most powerful men in global music like his own personal, heavily burdened sugar daddy and late-night drinking buddy. If you have followed BTS's chaotic behind-the-scenes lore for even a fraction of their phenomenal career, you already know that Jin's relationship with Bang Si-hyuk is less like a formal arrangement between boss and artist, and infinitely more like an exhausted, constantly annoyed uncle dealing with an incredibly spoiled, excessively loud, and demanding nephew who absolutely refuses to leave his house. Jin does not write long, emotionally devastating philosophical essays in the dead of night like RM, nor does he silently sit in the corner brooding over musical compositions like Suga. Instead, Jin's aggressive clinginess manifests in the form of completely unhinged, random cacao talk messages demanding that Bang PD immediately drop whatever highly crucial executive board meeting he is currently attending just to buy him an outrageously expensive plate of premium Hanwoo beef or fresh sushi.
We are talking about a global superstar who literally has millions of dollars sitting in his personal bank account, yet he still feels the absolute, undeniable need to casually crash Bang Si-hyuk's private office unannounced, plop down on his expensive furniture, and explicitly demand that the CEO personally cook for him or pay for his dinner just to validate their deep emotional connection. But before you simply brush this off as just another classic, hilarious Jin moment designed purely for variety show laughs, you have to look significantly deeper into the profound psychological strategy and immense emotional intelligence behind this unapologetic, wallet-draining clinginess. You must actively remember that when Jin originally joined Big Hit Entertainment, he was just a completely lost, musically inexperienced college acting student surrounded by terrifyingly talented underground rappers and intensely focused child prodigy dancers, making him feel incredibly small, intensely insecure, and wildly out of place in those dark, humid underground practice rooms. He acutely recognized that the younger members, especially a painfully shy 15-year-old Jungkook, were absolutely terrified of their strict, intimidating boss. So Jin deliberately, consciously took it upon himself to become the designated icebreaker, aggressively clinging to Bang PD and constantly teasing him just to completely shatter that terrifying corporate wall and create a genuine, desperately needed family dynamic for the deeply traumatized trainees. His financial clinginess is actually a brilliant, deeply moving coping mechanism. By forcing Bang PD to constantly buy him food, take him on entirely non-musical weekend fishing trips where they just complain about the weather, and engage in ridiculous, childish arguments over who is paying the bill, Jin masterfully humanized the very man who held their entire futures in his hands. Bang PD has actually confessed in multiple behind-the-scenes moments that he genuinely loves and secretly craves this incredibly annoying, boundary-destroying behavior, because Jin is arguably the only person left in his heavily insulated, yes-man-filled corporate bubble who is not fundamentally terrified of him, choosing to treat him like an actual human being rather than a terrifying, untouchable billionaire. There is a beautifully raw, entirely undocumented intimacy in their shared fishing trips, where the crushing global weight of the BTS empire is temporarily paused, and they can just be two regular guys desperately trying to catch a fish, while Jin relentlessly roasts Bang PD's terrible angling skills and unapologetically demand he buy them dinner afterward. Think about the profound emotional vacuum that must have instantly swallowed the Hive executive floor the second Jin bravely marched off to complete his mandatory military service, leaving behind a deafening, heartbreaking silence where his loud, demanding, windshield wiper laughs and constant nagging used to perfectly echo through the sterile hallways. Beneath the breathtaking visuals, the legendary dad jokes, and the hilarious, unapologetic demands for free meals, lies an incredibly sensitive, highly observant older brother who aggressively clung to the CEO so the younger kids would never have to feel the crushing, cold weight of the corporate machine bearing down on their fragile shoulders. He intentionally made himself the annoying, clingy, financially demanding target so his brothers could just safely focus on their art and grow up without fear, proving that his legendary, shameless behavior is actually one of the most selfless, deeply loving sacrifices in the entire history of the group. His wallet-draining, highly territorial attachment perfectly secures his legendary spot at number 4, completely redefining what it actually means to be close to your boss. But if you think Jin's demanding, food-obsessed clinginess is absolutely wild to comprehend, you better firmly brace yourself for the intensely physical, emotionally paralyzing, and downright lethal attachment style of our number 3 member, who practically uses pure, weaponized affection to get absolutely whatever his heart desires.
Number 3. Jimin, the lethal hugging machine, unmasked. When we talk about the sheer, undeniable power of physical affection and the devastating emotional weight of absolute vulnerability in the hyper-competitive world of K-pop, it is absolutely impossible not to immediately think of Park Jimin, the mesmerizing lead vocalist and main dancer who claims our heavily contested number 3 spot. On the global stage, Jimin is a fiercely captivating, undeniably lethal performer who can command the screaming attention of an entire stadium with a single sharp gaze, an effortless hair flip, or a breathtakingly fluid contemporary dance move that seems to entirely defy the rigid laws of gravity. But the moment he steps off that brightly lit stage and the heavy adrenaline finally wears off, he completely transforms into a profoundly sensitive, intensely emotional soul who craves deep human connection like oxygen. His specific, highly documented brand of clinginess is entirely physical and relentlessly emotional, creating a fascinating dynamic with Bang Si-hyuk that completely shatters the traditional, terrifying boundaries of corporate hierarchy in South Korea. While Jin might aggressively demand expensive dinners and Suga might silently demand musical validation, Jimin's attachment to Bang PD manifests as a desperate, overwhelming need for warm physical reassurance and gentle paternal comfort. We are talking about the man who famously has absolutely no concept of personal space, casually wrapping his arms around the billionaire CEO for a lingering tight back hug, resting his chin heavily on Bang Si-hyuk's shoulder during highly stressful company meetings, and unapologetically demanding sweet verbal affirmations of his worth. To truly deeply understand the profound psychological roots of this extreme physical clinginess, you have to mentally travel all the way back to his agonizing, terrifying trainee days, a dark and uncertain period where Jimin was infamously almost cut from the final debuting lineup of BTS a staggering 8 separate times. He had the absolute shortest training period out of all 7 members, arriving completely late to the group's formation from Busan with a heavy background in contemporary dance rather than hip-hop, which made him feel incredibly inadequate, entirely out of place, and constantly paralyzed by the suffocating fear that he was going to be violently stripped of his lifelong dream right at the very finish line. During those desperate, grueling months, Jimin would brutally punish his own body, practicing his vocals and choreography until 3 or 4 in the morning, sleeping only a couple of hours in the cramped, humid dance studio, all while silently carrying the crushing, agonizing weight of impending rejection. Bang Si-hyuk was the ultimate executive executioner who held Jimin's entire fate in his hands, but he was also the visionary who ultimately, firmly decided to keep him, recognizing the raw, untapped, shimmering potential hiding behind those deeply insecure, swollen, sleep-deprived eyes. Because of this intense, life-altering history, Jimin's relationship with Bang PD is incredibly fragile, fiercely loyal, and heavily drenched in a profound sense of lifelong gratitude. Whenever Jimin feels that terrifying, familiar wave of performance anxiety creeping up his spine, or whenever he genuinely believes his vocals were not absolutely flawlessly perfect during a 3-hour stadium concert, he does not just quietly reflect in his hotel room, he actively, frantically seeks out Bang Si-hyuk to physically anchor himself to reality. Highly placed industry insiders and staff members have tearfully recounted instances where a deeply overwhelmed, sobbing Jimin has called Bang PD in the absolute dead of night just to cry his eyes out over a minor voice crack that literally nobody else in the massive arena even noticed, desperately needing the CEO to explicitly, repeatedly tell him that he is talented, that he is enough, and that he is not going to be suddenly abandoned. It is a stunning, heartbreakingly beautiful form of emotional dependency that proves just how heavy the sparkling crown of superstardom truly is for someone who feels every single emotion at maximum agonizing capacity. Jimin deliberately uses his weaponized, irresistible affection to melt the strict corporate exterior of the HYBE founder, forcing the intimidating executive to soften his gaze, offer a warm, comforting embrace, and step into the vital role of a protective father figure rather than a distant, unapproachable boss. Have you ever stopped to carefully observe the way Jimin looks at Bang PD during their intimate company dinners? His eyes entirely filled with a pure, unadulterated trust that completely contradicts the ruthless, cutthroat nature of the entertainment industry they completely dominate together. Does it not completely break your heart to realize that the breathtaking artist who effortlessly seduces millions with his solo masterpieces like Lie and Filter still needs to violently cling to the very man who once almost kicked him out of the agency just to constantly remind himself that he is finally safe and truly belongs? Jimin's lethal, incredibly physical, and profoundly emotional
attachment flawlessly secures his spot at number 3, completely redefining the raw power of vulnerability. But if you think his tearful late-night phone calls and constant need for hugs are incredibly intense, you absolutely will not be prepared for the mind-bending, deeply spiritual, and almost telepathic level of clinginess displayed by our number 2 member, who practically operates on an entirely different emotional frequency from the rest of humanity.
Number 2. Si-hyuk, the telepathic free spirit, unveiled. When we explore the sheer, unprecedented complexity of human connections within the heavily structured, notoriously rigid hierarchy of the South Korean entertainment industry, Kim Si-hyuk, globally worshipped as V, completely shatters every single preconceived notion of what an artist-CEO relationship is actually supposed to look like, rightfully earning his spot at the heavily contested number 2 position. Known worldwide for his breathtaking, museum-worthy visuals, his incredibly deep, soulful baritone voice that feels like warm honey pouring over crushed velvet, and his eccentric, completely unpredictable personality, Si-hyuk operates on a completely different, almost telepathic emotional frequency that absolutely nobody else on the planet can fully comprehend, except, surprisingly, Si-hyuk himself. V's specific, highly documented brand of clinginess is not rooted in the desperate need for musical validation like Suga, nor is it based on the heavily anxious, physical reassurance demanded by Jimin. Rather, it is a profoundly spiritual, wildly unpredictable, and intensely, deeply personal attachment that completely ignores the fundamental laws of time, space, and corporate boundaries. To truly grasp the devastating emotional weight of their unique bond, you must painfully rewind the clock all the way back to the agonizing, intensely isolating pre-debut days when Si-hyuk was famously designated as the hidden member of BTS. For agonizing months, while his 6 brothers were actively filming vlogs, engaging with early fans, and building their public personas, Si-hyuk was strictly forced to remain completely invisible, hiding in the dark corners of the studio, sitting alone in the dorms, and watching the others from the suffocating shadows. He has heartbreakingly confessed how he used to stand out of the camera's frame, desperately wishing he could just say a simple hello to the world. Si-hyuk was the mastermind behind this excruciatingly painful marketing strategy, a decision that could have easily bred lifelong resentment and deep-seated trauma, but instead, it miraculously forged a complex, profoundly deep soul tie between the lonely, eccentric boy from Daegu and the billionaire mastermind. Because of that intense shared history of enforced isolation, Si-hyuk now aggressively refuses to ever be separated from his ultimate mentor, casually treating the heavily guarded, ultra-exclusive executive floor of the HYBE headquarters like his own personal, whimsical playground. He does not knock, he simply drifts into Bang PD's private office like a wandering spirit, unapologetically hijacking the CEO's personal computer to play video games for hours, or demanding that they listen to obscure, scratchy vinyl records of classic 1950s jazz artists in total, absolute silence. He is infamous for randomly calling Si-hyuk at the most absurd and unpredictable hours of the day, not to urgently discuss the global chart performance of his critically acclaimed solo album Layover, but simply to tell him about a strange, beautiful cloud he just saw in the sky, to share a weird dream he had, or to explicitly demand that they go out and eat expensive strawberries together immediately. Si-hyuk, who is widely feared and deeply respected as a ruthless, highly calculating corporate titan by the rest of the industry, completely melts into a soft, indulging, immensely patient father figure whenever Si-hyuk is around, helplessly surrendering his time and energy to this free-spirited artist who simply refuses to abide by the standard rules of human interaction. It is an incredibly moving, visually hilarious, yet profoundly deep dynamic that beautifully highlights the immense, unspoken guilt Bang PD might still quietly carry for hiding him away from the world all those years ago, and Si-hyuk's brilliant, subconscious way of ensuring that he will absolutely never, ever be overlooked, ignored, or left in the shadows again.
When you actively witness Si-hyuk's effortless, breathtaking charisma on a massive international red carpet, completely draped in luxury designer brands and commanding the flashing cameras with a single devastating smirk, it is almost impossible to reconcile that intimidating, untouchable image with the deeply affectionate, incredibly needy young man who literally forces his billionaire boss to play chaotic video games with him on a random Tuesday afternoon. His clinginess is an absolute, unfiltered expression of pure, unconditional love. A desperate, beautiful attempt to constantly tether his wandering artistic soul to the one man who ultimately handed him the keys to the entire universe. Does it not completely change your entire perspective on his deeply emotional, incredibly soulful solo tracks like Winter Bear or Scenery, knowing that the same man who writes such profoundly beautiful, deeply isolating lyrics is actually just craving a constant telepathic connection with his favorite mentor? It is a mind-bending, utterly fascinating level of attachment that perfectly solidifies his legendary status at number 2. But if you genuinely think Si-hyuk's telepathic, wildly unpredictable soul tie is the ultimate peak of clinginess, you are absolutely not ready for the sheer, unadulterated, entirely consuming devotion of our undisputed number 1 member, who has quite literally spent his entire life molding his very existence around the HYBE CEO.
Number 1. Jungkook, the ultimate golden baby, exposed. When you finally reach the undisputed, absolute pinnacle of our list, diving deep into the ultimate agency secrets that have been carefully hidden behind closed doors long before and even after their highly anticipated reunion, there is only one name that could possibly claim the undisputed throne of the most wildly clingy member, and that is the golden maknae himself, Jungkook. To truly comprehend the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of Jungkook's emotional dependency on Si-hyuk, you have to actively realize that this is not just a standard, highly regulated professional relationship, nor is it merely a deep, passing friendship. It is a literal, legally binding, and intensely profound father-son dynamic that has entirely shaped the psychological foundation of the biggest pop star on the entire planet. Imagine for a second being just 15 years old, a painfully shy, incredibly insecure kid from Busan who literally bursts into anxious tears when anyone simply asks him to sing a single note, suddenly being thrust into the unforgiving, hyper-competitive, deeply terrifying meat grinder of the Seoul entertainment industry. He famously turned down massive, highly lucrative, and incredibly tempting offers from several major established agencies solely because he was deeply, instantly mesmerized by RM's underground rapping aura, but it was ultimately Si-hyuk who essentially took on the monumental, terrifying, and completely unprecedented responsibility of actually raising this incredibly fragile, wildly talented child into a relentless, untouchable global icon. Because he spent his entire formative adolescence completely trapped inside the sterile, humid walls of the big hit practice rooms instead of experiencing a normal, everyday high school life, Jungkook's entire fundamental concept of family, safety, and personal identity is inextricably permanently tethered to the CEO who literally watched him grow up from a scared boy into a global titan. His specific, unmatched brand of clinginess is an absolute, all-consuming, intensely fierce devotion that casually makes the other members' demanding behaviors look like passing acquaintances. We are talking about a young, fiercely powerful man who routinely treats the billionaire founder of a global music empire like his own personal live-in dad. According to legendary company staff and deeply buried behind-the-scenes industry secrets that are absolutely guaranteed to drive viewer engagement and subscriber activity through the roof, Jungkook will completely bypass all standard corporate protocols, actively ignoring his highly paid managers and terrifying security details, just to aggressively barge directly into Bang PD's private executive office and demand that they eat a massive, outrageously expensive meal together, entirely refusing to leave the room until his father explicitly praises his latest vocal cover, his newest tattoo, or his intense late-night boxing routine. When BTS finally hit the astronomical, terrifying, and deeply isolating heights of global superstardom, breaking unimaginable world records and facing the crushing, suffocating pressure of being the undeniable voice of an entire generation,
Jungkook didn't turn to highly paid industry therapists or external celebrity friends. He literally curled up on Bang Si-hyuk's expensive leather office sofa and cried his eyes out, completely overwhelmed by the terrifying reality of his own massive, uncontrollable fame. Remember that iconic, deeply emotional, and heavily documented moment during their early physically exhausting concert tours when Jungkook famously broke down in hysterical, uncontrollable tears on stage, sobbing so hard he could barely breathe because he genuinely felt he hadn't performed perfectly for the screaming fans. Behind the scenes, away from the flashing cameras and the roaring stadiums, it was Bang PD who had to physically hold him, gently wiping away the hot tears and repeatedly, patiently assuring him that his worth as a human being was not solely defined by hitting a flawless, perfect high note. Even as he successfully launched his massive, historic, record-breaking solo career with absolute global smash hits like Seven and Standing Next to You, completely dominating the international pop charts as a fierce, untouchable, highly sensual solo artist, his underlying desperate need for Bang Si-hyuk's ultimate validation never faded even a single microscopic fraction. He might be heavily tattooed, completely dripping in expensive designer brands, fiercely independent on stage, and fully capable of commanding a massive global audience with a single sultry gaze. But the exact second the blinding stage lights turn off, he completely, instantly reverts to that same nervous, wide-eyed 15-year-old kid who desperately needs a warm pat on the head and a comforting hug from his agency father. Insiders have repeatedly revealed that during the deeply emotional, highly complex, and heavily guarded discussions surrounding their inevitable military enlistments and their highly anticipated future reunion plans, massive secrets the agency has been desperately trying to keep under strict wraps to perfectly control the media narrative, Jungkook was the one who most aggressively, desperately clung to the sacred promise of coming back together under Bang PD's protective wing. He physically, mentally, and spiritually cannot envision a world, a solo career, or a human existence where he is completely surrounded by his 6 older brothers and heavily guided by the very man who first recognized his golden, limitless potential. His clinginess is entirely pure, utterly unfiltered, and profoundly beautiful. It is the breathtaking, emotionally devastating culmination of a 10-year journey of a boy who literally sacrificed his entire youth, his privacy, and his normalcy to build an unimaginable empire, relying completely on the unshakable, loving foundation provided by his ultimate mentor. It absolutely redefines everything we know about loyalty and love and sacrifice in the notoriously cutthroat music business, creating an incredibly rich, dramatic, and intensely emotional narrative that keeps millions of dedicated fans desperately coming back for more. So the next time you look at the towering, untouchable, insanely powerful pop titan that is Jungkook today, completely ruling the global music scene with absolute authority, just remember that his undisputed, legendary #1 spot on this highly exclusive, deeply emotional list is permanently, undeniably secured by the absolute fact that beneath all the dazzling fame, the screaming millions, and the massive stadium tours, he is just a deeply grateful, intensely loyal son who will absolutely never, ever let go of the man who raised him from the very beginning.
And there you have it. The ultimate, deeply emotional, and surprisingly hilarious truth behind the flashing cameras and the heavily guarded doors of the Hive headquarters. Who would have ever thought that these 7 untouchable global icons, who casually sell out massive stadiums and completely dominate international music charts, are actually just a group of intensely loyal, deeply attached artists who absolutely refuse to let their billionaire boss have a single uninterrupted moment of peace? From RM's exhausting midnight philosophical essays and Jin's unapologetic wallet-draining demands all the way to Jungkook's fiercely protective, all-consuming devotion, this incredibly complex, beautifully chaotic father-son dynamic is the true, fiercely hidden backbone of their legendary, unprecedented success. It fundamentally proves that all the unimaginable fame, the screaming millions, and the record-breaking history they have systematically built together mean absolutely nothing without that raw, profoundly human connection constantly grounding them to reality.
As we actively brace ourselves for their highly anticipated, explosive group reunion, one simply has to wonder exactly how many more massive, deeply guarded secrets the agency has been desperately hiding from the public eye all these years. Will Bang Si-hyuk finally manage to get a decent night's sleep, or will the undeniable, overwhelming chaos of having all 7 intensely clingy members back together completely take over the executive floor once again? What do you guys truly think about this incredibly heartwarming, undeniably wild corporate family dynamic that defies every single rule in the cutthroat Korean entertainment industry? Which member's entirely unique, hilarious brand of clinginess shocked you the absolute most? And who do you secretly relate to when it comes to aggressively demanding attention from the people you love and trust? Drop your wildest theories, your deepest emotional reflections, and your absolute favorite behind-the-scenes BTS moments down in the comments below, because this conversation is far from over. Do not forget to absolutely smash that like button, hit that subscribe bell to boost our community so you never miss out on our relentless deep dives into the biggest, most exclusive untold stories of your favorite idols, and fiercely share this video across your fan pages with your fellow armies who definitely need a good laugh and a warm, comforting cry today. Until next time, keep streaming, keep chasing those massive dreams, and always remember that even the brightest, most powerful stars in the entire universe still desperately need someone to hold on to when the blinding stage lights finally go down.